Hello, I'm Dr. Diane Webster. This story is called Deciding Never to be a Surgeon, and it's set in 1979 when our doctor is a first-year intern and considering career choices for her future specialization within medicine. It's surprising in life that we often cannot anticipate what events may happen to change our mind about our future direction. Deciding Never to be a Surgeon, Footscray, August 1979. I was deciding never to be a surgeon, as I held 2 heavy retractors to keep open the abdomen of a patient while Dr. Russell performed the removal of the patient's gallbladder. We had been in theatre for over an hour by this stage, but no progress had been made by Dr. Russell to remove the gallbladder. I knew we would be here for another 2 hours at least. I had assisted Dr. Russell in surgeries before. I knew what to expect. This was a Friday afternoon, and it was the last operating session of my surgical term of my intern year at Footscray Hospital. The procedure that I was assisting Dr. Russell with had been difficult from the start. It was a re-operation after a previous complication by Dr. Russell weeks earlier. There were a lot of adhesions, otherwise known as scar tissue, to remove, and Dr. Russell had spent a lot of time dissecting them and controlling bleeding. This is how the last hour had been spent. Then he suddenly came to a halt in the procedure. He asked the nurse to get a surgical textbook from the doctor's note-writing station in the theatre and bring it to him. "I want the part about cholecystectomy," he called out to the nurse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This surgeon was so incompetent that he required the nurse to bring him some instructions from a textbook so that he could read how to do the surgery. The nurse held the textbook open at the directed page, but unfortunately, this did not help Dr. Russell or his patient. He still didn't know how to proceed, and another half hour had gone by. Then Dr. Russell decided to ring a colleague, Dr. Rees, to ask for advice. In 1979, the only telephones in theatre were attached to the wall. So Dr. Russell had to unscrub and call the other surgeon on the wall phone. Meanwhile, the long-suffering anaesthetist, Dr. Ruby Giles, kept the patient under general anaesthesia. Luckily, the surgeon that Dr. Russell contacted, Dr. Rees, was competent, and he was in the hospital at the moment. Dr. Rees could obviously tell from Dr. Russell's description of the case that Dr. Russell had no idea what he was doing. Lucky for all of us, Dr. Rees arrived about 15 minutes later, took over and finished the case successfully. Out in the change room, the female anaesthetist, Dr. Ruby Giles, bowls in and starts a conversation with me. I thought she would say what a balls up the case had been under Dr. Russell's hands, but she didn't even mention it. I guessed she was his usual anaesthetist and so would never say anything negative about him to others because she wanted to continue doing his lists. How could anyone regularly put up with all this stuffing around that Dr. Russell did? A gallbladder removal should be done in around 45 minutes, not 3 hours. But no, the anaesthetist chatted about something else entirely different. "What school did you go to, Diane?" she asked. Of course, I thought, this is Melbourne, and the superficial conversation always revolves around 3 topics. Which school did you go to? Which route did you take to get to where we are? And what's the weather like outside? "Melbourne Church of England Girls' Grammar School," I replied, and I knew this was a good answer. I'm thinking, thank goodness my parents didn't send me to one of the local high schools. It had to be a private school in Melbourne in professional circles to be the right answer in 1979. Apparently, the type of school you went to, be it public or private, told the person asking the question everything about you that they needed to know. Ruby said nothing after I answered her question and quickly left the change rooms. I was left alone to think about the last 3 hours and all the other surgical operations I had assisted at during my surgical term. It was understood you didn't get to do any actual major surgery during one's intern year, only assisting. We did minor procedures, of course, in casualty and the procedure room, but I spent the last 3 months merely assisting other fully qualified surgeons at major cases. As I took off my surgical scrubs and changed into my day clothes, I thought, I will never enter an operating theatre again. There's no need to. I'm on the last day of my surgical job in my intern year. I've completed my anaesthetics term. Next year, I'll get a position doing medical terms, so I won't need to go into the operating theatres ever again. I decided I hated surgery and being a surgical assistant. As an assistant, you are at the behest of the principal surgeon. The surgeon is the one in control of the entire procedure. The assistant merely holds the retractors and does whatever the surgeon asks them to do. The assistant has no power or control over how the surgical list will unfold. They just have to be a passive part of the whole procedure. Anyway, this would not affect me any longer because I thought I am never going to be in an operating theatre again. Well, fast forward 2 years to 1981, and I am trying to get into the ophthalmology training program. Dr. Mani Shargil, who is already in the training program, tells me that I should make an appointment to meet every doctor whose name is on the selection panel. I find myself with an appointment to see Dr. Thomas Travis, a very distinguished ophthalmologist who had received a knighthood for his service to medicine. He had agreed to meet me at his practice in a Victorian terrace mansion on Victoria Parade, East Melbourne. He had paused his afternoon consulting session especially for my appointment. When I arrive, I am ushered by his secretary through the waiting room to a lovely parlour set with the most ornate English silver tea service that I have ever seen. The round table is perfectly set for afternoon tea with sandwiches. Dr. Tom asks me, "Why do you want to be an ophthalmologist?" I reply, "Well, I'd like to treat adults, children and babies and improve their sight. The eye is intimately connected to all the other body systems, so the whole of ophthalmology is tremendously interesting for me." "Yes, but what about the surgery? Ophthalmology is a surgical specialty. You've got to like the surgery. Do you like surgery?" "Well, I really haven't given that aspect of it much thought," I trailed off. I'm thinking this is not going well. I really thought there wasn't much surgery in ophthalmology. I thought it would be mostly medical treatments. Dr. Travers continued, "Well, think about that from now on. It's a surgical specialty. You've got to love the surgery." I walked out of Sir Tom's rooms in a daze. "You've got to love the surgery" was ringing in my ears. But I thought I hated surgery, I'm thinking. What had I hated so much about my surgical term as a first-year doctor? I think it was not being in control and having to tolerate incompetent surgeons or surgeons that just wasted time instead of focusing on getting the job done. But after my discussion with Sir Tom, I decided I wouldn't hate being a surgeon anymore. I really had only hated being an assistant. I had never really been a surgeon, and I decided at that point that I wanted to learn to be a really good surgeon. I wanted to be an ophthalmologist. So from now on, I'm going to love doing surgery, I told myself. And I did. For over the next 35 years as a practicing ophthalmic surgeon, I performed more than 30,000 cataract surgeries, and I love doing every one of them. That's the end of the story. It just shows how things can change in life so dramatically. For more stories, go to my YouTube channel at Dr. Diane Leslie Webster. Thanks for watching, and I hope you do something today that brings you joy.